Exodus chapter 1 verse 1 through 22. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us, and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew woman, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Book of Exodus is the second book of the entire Bible, coming right after the book of Genesis. To put a general summary of the first two books, the book of Genesis is the book of promise, and the book of Exodus is God fulfilling the promises made in the first book. Of all the promises recorded in the book of Genesis, the first chapter of the book of Exodus is the fulfillment of the promise God gave to Abraham back in chapter 12 of Genesis. Genesis chapter 12 verse 2 and 3 says, "And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." First promise of making Abraham's descendants into a great nation is fulfilled in the first 7 verses of Exodus. The second promise of making the name of Abraham's descendants great is fulfilled in verse 9 and 10, where the people of Egypt see God's blessings upon Israel and how strong they have become. The final promise of being a blessing and a curse is fulfilled in verse 15 through 21, where the midwives that care for the Israelite babies fear God and save the children of Israel. Because they gave blessing to Israel, God poured out his blessing upon the midwives and blessed them with families. God comes to us in the very same manner. He promises salvation through Jesus Christ, and we have received this promise like Abraham did. However, we have not yet seen the fulfillment of this promise, since we will only be able to receive the promise when we enter into his kingdom. Although Abraham did not yet see the promise fulfilled, he believed in God and trusted in God to lead him. Likewise, although God's promise of salvation is not yet fulfilled, we can trust that God will most definitely fulfill his promise and allow him to lead our lives until then. God's promises found in the scripture have already been fulfilled and will be fulfilled in his time. As we meditate on today's passage, May God give us the strength to trust in His promises until the time He fulfills them.